All right, here we are, Renee, another episode of Stepping in It. Can you tell me what we're stepping in today?
Yeah, we have a really fun guest today that you and I've met on our journey through training
Yeah.
with NAMI, Iowa, and excited to introduce him to the world. He doesn't even know really why he's here. So, what could possibly go wrong on this topic? We're going to talk about real life experience, some NAMI statistics about why NAMI is pretty awesome and why we all serve and work with them. And then just tell some stories about some of our time together and some of the things we're seeing out there as we all do our work in helping people get better care. So, I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So before we kick off Josh, we should ask Jason what he's up to on the farm. So what's going on in the farm, Jason, right now? Corn?
I thought for a minute
Well,
you were going to skip the whole whitey
no, how could
farmer
I skip the
thing.
farmer, whiny farmer intro? What
Well,
is going on with
ev-
corn? Tell us all about it.
well, everything's planted. And so this is the time of year, and only if you grew up on a farm do you understand, is I'm leveling the rock in the driveway, right? Because everything's planted. I've got nothing else to do. And so this is the time of the year where you have loads of rock brought in and you level it off, you make it perfect, right? Because farmers get a little obsessive sometimes about, mowing and making things look nice. And so we put in all the extra grain bins. And so I need the semis to be able to come in and out without sinking into the mud later in the fall or earlier in the spring. So I'm leveling the rock. And I'm getting a little obsessive about it because, you have to level it with one bucket. And then I found a different bucket that makes it a little smoother. And then I harrow it after that. And then I have a big, long leveler that I run over it. Too much information, right, Renee? Is
Yeah,
that?
that's hilarious. So, fun fact, my father-in-law did not live on a farm, but he lived out in rural Granger, Iowa, and he had a rock driveway. And he had a
Uh-huh.
rake that attached to the John Deere
Yeah.
that he would rake the driveway so it had perfect lines down the
Yep.
driveway. And then he would
Yeah.
just drive in the two lines, were the only places where
Yep.
tires could go in and out of that driveway. A
Yep.
little obsessive compulsive, but yes, I
See,
understand raking the driveway and making sure rocks were nowhere else but said driveway. Just from being at my
correct.
father-in-law's house. Not a farmer, still had those thoughts. So that's pretty
Rural
interesting.
life. Hashtag rural life. This is what it's
What a
all
hop.
about.
See, Josh, this is what we do on this podcast. So today Josh is here. Josh, would you just tell everybody who you are and kind of how you can share how you met us if you wish, and kind of what you hope to talk about today on our podcast?
Yeah, so my name's Josh Hubble. I'm from Ames. I am all of the crazy. I could go over my diagnosis, but I just had to go to court for some disability stuff. So I got to see my more current diagnosis, and it's long. It's about 3.5 pages long, in fact.
Wow.
And I met you guys through NAMI Provider. I'm a NAMI person. Well, I could go down the list, I suppose. I'm a peer-to-peer teacher and state trainer. I'm a in our own voice teacher and state trainer, well, presenter and state trainer. I'm a provider, teacher, and state trainer. I'm a family teacher and state trainer. I'm a family support group provider. I'm a connections provider and state trainer. I'm sure I'm missing something. There's so much NAMI in there.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I've
So
been
I
around
remember I've
for
met Josh probably, I don't know now, how many years do you think I've been teaching with you? Well, when first came out, so that's been 5 to 7 years now, somewhere in there.
it's
And
longer than that because we were pre-pandemic. So
we were at
Yeah.
DMU with for the
yeah,
very first DMU round
yep.
when the Des Moines University was going to bring it into their university. And so it was sort of a pilot back then. And so it
Hmm.
kind of came on a long time ago. And Josh and I were on panels together and got to know and talk to each other. And so I've really appreciated Josh's honesty and his vulnerability and authenticity about his
Mhm.
story. And then we just have a good time too. We laugh a lot when we on the panel together. So I always request if I can be on a panel with Josh. I always know I'm going to have a much more fun time as an instructor as I do with some of not that other instructors aren't good, but you know what I'm saying. We just laugh a
No,
lot. So it's a
I'm
lot of fun.
definitely the best. I agree.
I agree. Yeah. And then Jason, you met Josh, that's a little bit later, but still through DMU, right? Is that the first time you think you had?
DMU and NAMI provider, absolutely. I got to sit with Josh in a couple of trainings, and I know he's one of my favorites. So yeah, I love being on the panels and being an instructor alongside Josh. It's been an experience at a couple of them that we've done. And
Yeah.
I want to step back and just remind people, NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Renee, we go to these trainings and we ask people how many people know NAMI, and still I don't see everyone's hands go up. And there are just a number of fantastic training products that are available from NAMI National, that are at NAMI affiliates, statewide affiliates, and local affiliates all across the country. And so I just want to remind people, we'll put in the show notes a link to NAMI so you can see some of those different opportunities that are available to learn more. And Josh, can you tell us just a little bit more about some of the stuff with NAMI? You've really gotten involved with NAMI over the years. Do you want to tell us kind of how that came to be?
Yeah, so I started getting involved with NAMI. I have always made super good life choices, and some of those landed me in prison for some time. And when I was in the halfway house, there were other people that went to a local NAMI wellness center here in Ames, and they kind of drugged me along because they knew I needed it. Had kind of a severe breakdown when I got out. And I started going to that center, and I took my first class, which was peer-to-peer, which is a peer-led information course that peers take. It's now an 8-week course. It was 10 weeks when I took it, but I took that in a separate room because my social anxiety was so bad I couldn't be in a room where people were sitting in a group. So they let me take it in a quiet room to the side, and after that, and after watching other peers do what they were doing, I kind of got some confidence built up, and then offered to teach classes, and then they started asking me to learn stuff, and then I stopped saying no to them, and then they just kept going and going and going, and now they own me. So in fact, I was just in Independence Tuesday doing provider. So
Yeah. Yeah, one of the neat things that's happened in Iowa is NAMI provider is being taught to every employee of all of the state institutions. And that's really it's a huge win for NAMI Iowa, but it's also helping to better recognize that there needs to be more education across the workforce. And I think having you deliver that training, Josh, I think is amazing because it gives a different perspective to those who take that training. Renee, what are your thoughts as you think about I know that you're very interested in the intersection between the justice system, criminal justice, and mental illness. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data that comes from that here in a minute. But tell me, what do you think about how that continuum works currently?
Well, we still struggle in this space because there are some NAMI classes in the correctional institutions, but providers not allowed in currently. And I don't know if Josh ever got this fixed, but at one point they weren't going to allow felons to teach within the system and in corrections to felons. And so if we're talking from a peer-to-peer perspective, that doesn't make any sense. And so sometimes we have some policies and just some barriers. So where my frustration lies on the correction side, it's even some of these gains we've made in human services hasn't all come across to corrections. And in most states, those are siloed. They're different departments and they have different rules and things. But it really doesn't make any sense. And so some of the things that people gain where some of the programming is available, but not all, that's a challenge. And then really, because these are free programs to the community, just the lack of knowledge that they exist is really frustrating to me because these are programs that people can come right out of and re-enter community and be able to plug right into if they knew where they were located, how to do that and all of that. And I don't think that we do a good job of giving that as a resource that we should upon leaving. And Josh knows this, he can speak to this, but you guys can tell each other things about your experiences in a different way that a doctor will never make any kind of impact. Or, somebody like me who hasn't had that experience, I can't tell people what to do in that space. So having that peer voice is so important. And I just don't think we leverage it the way we should on the correctional side. And that's just my opinion.
my opinion too. So there's been a little bit of headway. They did approve just me to do some trainings, but then provider
That's
kicked
good.
off. And so I went down the provider road instead. So I haven't done any trainings for institutions, but now that statewide providers kind of winding down, that's a possibility because I've been approved to go into institutions
That's
even
good.
with
But we
about
had to fight for that, Josh. And that's
I did.
crazy because we're like, Josh would be the perfect person to talk to folks about their issues because you're so open about that. And you've had such a varied, interesting background, right? So you touch a lot of topics and a lot of issues. And so That's why, but yeah, you had to have a special approval. That is crazy to me. I mean, so sometimes the policies don't match. And so it needs to be person-centered, which we keep talking about. And even in policy, it's just not. And so that's where my kind of rub comes in. So Josh, when you see folks coming in and re-entering into the community before we get to the data, where do you see gaps? I know you see it, I see it, but where do you see it from your side? Where do people fall off and not connect to NAMI like they could? How does that gap happen?
Well, there's definitely a problem with the whole felons interacting with felons issue. And that was a problem clear back when I was still on probation and going through treatment and everything. Interestingly, towards the end of my treatment, the judicial second up here, their probation office started using me as peer support for other people, but it had to be so like managed that a lot of people weren't interested in it because it had to be so managed. And because of the way that we're kind of trained as peer support specialists, I'm also a state certified peer support specialist. I guess I didn't mention that. There's a lot of things that felons just don't feel okay with. I know when I was being trained person first language, while it's a great tool and people love it, I absolutely hate it. And I know guys coming out are not going to want to be talked to like that. So there's a lot of space in how people get talked to. There's a lot of space in what probation officers understand. I was fortunate that my second probation officer was really well versed in mental health, but my first one had me cuffed and thrown in a cell and taken in front of a judge because I went to the hospital for feeling suicidal. Wasn't threatening, just wanted help and didn't want to be in danger. And next day in jail.
Yeah.
Luckily, there were other people involved in that. They kept me out of jail because they knew I wasn't doing anything wrong and I was doing what I should have done, So I definitely think a program like Provider would be great for law enforcement.
Agreed.
And I've done
Yeah.
speaking with law enforcement. I haven't been trained for the new NAMI program because it's still kind of getting revved up. But before that, I did the speeches for pre-CIT, before CIT was a thing. We went around the state, talked to law enforcement and mental health people all in the same room. I think that did a lot of good. But yeah, there's still a lot of
NAMI used to have training component with the law enforcement academy, but I think we've decided that has gone away and they brought in somebody different to do it.
Yeah.
I know the contact at Law Enforcement Academy. Maybe I need to circle back on that and be like, hey, let's do that a little different. That doesn't fix our probation parole, which I need fixed too, but it would at least get the law enforcement. It was again, they're also segmented, right? There's a lot more that we could do in this space of that. And so to continue on your conversation there, Josh, when you had a parole officer do that, or probation officer put you back into a cell and, arrest you again for needing help. I have a magistrate judge in my office, and she did civil commitments for mental health prior to becoming an ALJ and she revokes people to prison now. Her greatest frustration is that there's no other choices. And so by the time they come in front of her to have to figure out what we're going to do with them because they've revoked on their probation or parole, then she is stuck with sending them back to prison or kind of nothing in many cases. And she's so frustrated about that because she knows they need help with substance abuse. They need help in mental health. And so by the time a warrant is filed and it comes to her, she has to act. But then it's very limited on where people can go. There are some treatment options, but it's very limited. And so then they get revoked back to prison. And you can tell us what's different in federal prison, but in Iowa prison, there's just not a lot of treatment for substance abuse and mental health. And I can go into the history of that if we want to, but basically you put them in prison, incarcerate them long enough to sober up. And then they might take a class or two where there's a learning component or a module on the topic, but there's no longer substance abuse counselors inside. There's no longer actual substance treatment inside. And so then you're supposed to send them out, and then they're supposed to connect to the outpatient system for additional treatment. And there's a hole the size of a meteor between those two things where they fall back off, and then they go right back to my judge who's super frustrated that they didn't get into the treatment and we start all over again. So it's just it's disheartening. I mean, that's why I'm here at the parole board, is to try to see if we can make some inroads. And that's why I'd like to talk to you, because I'd love to hear how maybe we could partner together, try to get on this. So Jason, you've dealt with this in another state. So before we get into the data, talk about like what you saw in Nebraska with the same conversation. You should tell Josh the stories about commitment to stand trial.
There's There's so many stories, and I am gonna jump into data because you prepped it twice, Renee, and I just
I'm
can't
sorry.
not do it anymore, right? And I think it relates directly to what the work that we do, what we just did in Nebraska. And I mean, the bottom line is, and I went back to an NIH article 10 years ago, people with mental illnesses are overrepresented in the criminal justice settings in the United States, including jails, prisons, probation, and parole. It's nothing new. We've been struggling with these same issues for decades, literally decades, where we have the data, we have the research, and we know that there's gaps and holes for people like Josh who are transitioning, trying to find recovery, who are dealing with significant impairment and significant mental health conditions. We were just in Nebraska looking at how they manage, kind of how folks transition from their local jails to the state institution when someone needs a high level of care to stabilize. And the part that's always missing is that transition back to community of how do we support people in their local community. And Josh has done a great job, but Josh is also very articulate. You've found strong recovery, Josh. I've heard you speak many times about many different parts of your recovery and the challenges that come with that. And that includes having to go back to the hospital sometimes for a tune-up. I think you've called it sometimes because that's part of the illness is being able to go back and get help when you need it. And that's what's missing in a lot of our systems as we think about folks transitioning from wherever they're at, whether it's jail, whether it's a hospital, without the fear that jail is the next step because something goes wrong. Many times something will go wrong, and I'm also going to link you back to the NAMI by the numbers website because I think it's just good to remember 1 in 5 people in the adults in the United States experience mental illness. 1 in 20 experience a serious mental illness, which may result in hospitalization. 1 in 6 of US youth, 6 to 17, experience mental illness. 50% of lifetime mental illness begins by age 14, right? So this is a long road for a lot of folks. And so I just want to remind us that this is much more common and our systems aren't being designed to manage it well. And so I don't know if you want to react to that for a minute, Josh. Does that seem to be a good recap in your experience?
Yeah, I don't know that federal does it better because my experience for federal, I had basically no help, and I asked for help. I asked because I knew I would have problems, and I did because I went in with mental
Yeah.
illness, no treatment for 5 years, came out and thought I was doing well because institutionalization makes life easy, like especially for someone with my kind of social anxiety and stuff like that. Being in prison is super easy, and for many years, probably the first 5 years that I was out, I kind of wanted to go back because being out is hard and there just wasn't a lot of support. I would get a lot of, oh, I'm here to help you from like my probation officer or my treatment people. And then that just kind of ended as soon as I was out the door. They didn't have resources to send me to. And this isn't just me. I ran into this a lot when I was still in treatment. I'm glad that they made use of me when they did, because there's at least one guy I know that they'd been trying to get him into treatment for PTSD, like intensive PTSD treatment, and he wouldn't listen to them at all. And they're like, "Will you sit and talk to him?" And an hour and a half of talking to me, and he checked himself in. So
Yeah.
peer support is huge, and the way that they don't let it happen because of whatever the worry is. I mean, I get it. I understand the whole felons talking to each other leading to worse things, but sometimes you got to take that risk. And I think probation officers should have a good sense of who they're working with, because like anything, the probation side and the mental health side, I had to commit to all of it myself. It wasn't really something anyone else could do for me or lead me to. I had to make those choices, and it's hard to do it. And I always hope I can help someone get to that choice a little easier than I did, because mine didn't really come up until I had a severe suicide attempt. So
Yeah.
We often talk about you, Josh, when we think about peer workforce. Renee and I end up talking about workforce a lot, and you're often the person I think of as to a part of the workforce that's missing because you can provide such support to both probation, to folks, as a peer, and you're a certified peer. You have had all the trainings. You have more education than a lot of the professionals that we would call, and I put that in air quotes, right? The professionals who are supposed to be out working with folks, you bring more to the table. And so I just wonder in a lot of the conversations I have, and when we go and look at states and people complain about workforce, why can't we utilize folks like you and look at the professionalism of peers and the difference they can make in supporting folks as they transition between levels of care? I think you just did a great job of explaining it. And I'm just kind of shocked sometimes. I say that word a lot, I know, of why we can't better figure out how to mobilize this whole group of folks like you who can provide so much to help people be successful. Why aren't we doing more of that, Renee? Do you want to have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have thoughts, but it's so frustrating because, we can talk to folks. So here's an example, Josh. I'm talking to guys that are coming out of prison weekly. It's my job. And many of them decide that before they leave prison, they're going to stop their medication because they don't want to be addicted to anything. And they're going to go out in the community. And you just said it's harder outside than in. So they're going the wrong direction on the way out the door. They're not going to listen. They just don't listen to us as the parole board. They don't listen to their doctor. They don't listen to the folks inside. And then they go out and use the illegal substances to medicate because it's hard. And then they're right back, right? And up here could be like, dude, you could just say it straight up that's whatever. And feel free to make that choice, which you always do say, right? You're not going to tell them what to do, but hey, here's the experience. And they would just thousands of those experience. I mean, I do that over, over. And I try to teach, but I've got guys that are bipolar on the depressed side drinking alcohol. And I'm like, do we know that that's a depressant? I mean, like, what are we doing? I've got the guys that are on the manic side that are doing the methamphetamine. Like, do you know that you're already manic? And so it's like and the answer is maybe, maybe not. But I'm like, we're using the wrong things for the wrong things. And then bad choices along that way, or just survival choices. I won't even say that they've consciously decided to do some of the illegal behavior. Sometimes it really is, they've fallen short of money, they've can't kept a job, they get in fights with their significant person, whatever, and those things land them back here. But none of that's better when they're not on their medication, their real medication, and are self-medicating. And so, but peers, when you get them, can talk to them and say things. And so the guys that I see that are successful, they like, oh, well, so-and-so was in here and that's my mentor, my friend, and they have set me straight. And you could tell they've got somebody with life experience who've explained differently, and it gets it. And then they've decided that they want to change. Like you said, nobody can do it for them, but you can tell when you're talking to them that like, oh, this one's got it. He's like, I talked to so-and-so and this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I'm going to change, because they're the only ones that can. And you guys do such a good job of telling that message that we as professionals, again, air quotes, can't get through the same way. And they don't trust us. And I don't think that they should, right? There's too many stories of like what you said, Josh, where I told them the truth and they put me in jail. Right. And that doesn't help.
And even so much as my federal prison experience, I have two for medication. One, when I first got there, they wanted to change me to a different antidepressant, and the doctor's excuse was, you'll never have a good enough job to pay for this on the outside. So you need to be on a keeper med, something you want to hear. And then the second one was, I was on something that you do not go off of, Zoloft. You don't stop it cold turkey unless you want to go into a coma. I didn't go into a coma, but I did have a really bad 2-week headache because my time for getting my prescription lapsed, and the person who prescribed it wouldn't see me earlier. So by the time they got around to seeing me, I was like, I'm just going to stay off that because you guys are not good enough at med management for me to be on meds in here.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, but yes, definitely. There's also, it's like a double whammy, especially if you have a mental illness, because you're coming out struggling with your mental illness while you're also struggling to relearn how to live in society. And people who've been inside can talk to each other in the way that we talk to each other inside. We know the things that are weird when you come out, because there's some experiences that if you haven't been in, you're not going to understand. And some behaviors that you might need to help your family understand, like, someone steps in front of you the wrong way and you freak out. It's because you've learned to live that way for years. So I think peer support is massively needed for people coming out. And yeah, I see it as a huge gap. And I've tried for years to work. Medicaid will not hire me because I'm a felon. So no
That's just wrong.
institution that would want to hire me through Medicaid will do it.
Yeah.
And
That's just wrong. It's so wrong because you're the exact skill set that's necessary in reentry, the skill set. And so and I'm sorry, I have more problems with people's significant person coming to prison, bringing in contraband than I ever will with a person that's a peer support specialist. I mean, by far, just ask the boyfriend, girlfriend, the what. We have more issues. I have a guy we just talked to last week. He literally almost died and had the Narcan, the guy, because his girlfriend came to visit him. And I'm not sure if the girlfriend was intending to hurt him, but it could have been. Maybe he doesn't even realize she was trying to kill him. But it all happened inside, part of a visit. And they allow those visits, right? So it's like, that's not helpful. So what are we talking about? Crazy town. And just the label, Josh, that's one of the things about that is once a felon, always a felon. That's just wrong. It's just wrong. And but it's a label. And we talk about stigma, and that label has stigma more, even as much or more so than mental illness. And it's a stigma that we have not figured out as a society how to address people and take it case by case, person by person. We just label and are like, oh, they're a blank. And then it changes the trajectory of what you can do and what you can work. So Josh, tell us what's the most exciting training you're doing right now. I mean, you train on all kinds of things. Where do you see good things happening in like training that's out there? Like where are you having fun plugging in to train now? You train across the board, all these things, but what's kind of fun that you see that's like, well, that's pretty good that this is happening in this space. What do you like about the training you
Well, I
do?
really like Provider most of the time.
Yeah.
Independence was a great experience. They were a good crowd and they were interactive, which is hard sometimes with Provider. A lot of times we go to an institution and nobody wants to talk or interact. But this last one was pretty good. Maybe shamed a few people into reading towards the I learned that from Renee, how to shame people into reading.
Right.
You have to trick them, Josh. Just trick them.
That's right.
Yeah. Also, Adventureland. This started out as a thing we were going to do 3 times. We did it once. We did it in our own voice for Adventureland for their employees. They wanted someone to come in for mental health training, and they wanted 2 more. But I think they're going to pivot to ending the silence for the next 2. But I'm excited to see companies like that reaching out for mental illness training for all their employees and stuff. Because it's just a thing that I think a lot of people and working at Adventureland, as it goes on, you're going to get a lot younger crowd, the kids there, So I was pretty excited about that one. A little sad that we're not going to keep doing it, but I think they're going to keep going with ending the silence, which is one I've been trained for, but I've never presented.
I have a question for you guys. I don't know the answer. Do you think the parole board would benefit by being trained in Provider? They're not providers.
Oh,
But do you think bringing it into an office of people whose job it is to release people or to put them back in prison, even though they're not provider people, do you think there's value in that particular course that could, it's not exactly law enforcement, but there is a law enforcement side of provider now. What do you guys think? Have you taught that law enforcement version yet, Josh?
I
Taught that one.
have not. I'm still pretty much doing
In the
Tony.
brand new binder that just got mailed to our house.
Yeah,
right.
it's sitting over there unopened.
I have 4 binders now of Provider in the
Only
very short
4?
amount of time.
I know, Josh, how many binders you think you got in your house? If you had to count, man, how many binders you got?
At least 10 between the different programs, and probably 5 of them are Provider.
They keep changing it, right? They
Yeah.
keep tweaking it, and then they're like, "There's a new one." I'm like, "Okay." When I
I've
teach
had-
it next time, I'll be like, "Which version am I on? Am I even on the right subject?"
Provider is aimed at healthcare professionals originally,
know.
right? If you go back, but it really is anyone who serves individuals or works with individuals, I think, who experience mental illness or substance use disorders. So I do think there's application much farther than the traditional healthcare, right? Because you're in a weird type of care type position, Renee. But I think there's some application there because it gets you to think about things a little bit differently sometimes.
Well, if it's not provider, we're talking about trying to train correction and POs.
Yeah.
Which one would it be? So we're all trainers in this world. Which one would it be that would be the right one to train the law enforcement?
I would definitely, if you're not going to do the specific speaking to law enforcement one, which again hasn't really been rolled out yet, I don't think, I would go with in-earned voice because it just gives people a chance to ask questions, listen to very personal stories, as well as like watching the videos about personal stories.
Okay.
I think it's the most direct contact you can get. And especially if you can get not, I'm just trying to get myself more work here, really. If you get somebody to do the interim voice, one of the two presenters, if they've had experience with law enforcement or corrections, that would make it even better because
Yep.
they talk about that. As long as they're comfortable talking, not everybody that's been in and in this business is still comfortable talking about their time inside. But some
That's
of
a
us,
good idea, Josh. I may have to follow up with you on that one because, like I said, sometimes our office, we're a small office, but it's nice to we've done some different types of training and model it, and then others around hear about it and then ask to do it. And so one way of just, I can't make everybody get trained that we need trained, but I can model it for people I can impact and then let them go out and kind of be ambassadors of it to others and say, hey, we got this training, you guys could benefit from it too. So that's a really good idea. Maybe we should think about that. So anything else, Josh, that we want to talk about that you think is like interesting in this space or anything? Is there anything that comes to mind that we've brought that you're
This
excited?
is your final recap, Josh. So if there's
Yeah.
anything else you wanted to say, this is the
Anything else?
last chance.
get out and vote. That's what's going to change things in the end. Like that's what would change, I think, Medicaid in the state and make it so that maybe they would actually hire people with felony
Yeah.
background experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
There are people out there doing good peer support. They probably don't have felonies on the record, but they might have been inside with misdemeanors or.
Do you think that's a state only issue or have we ever looked, is that national? Is every state doing it that way?
I don't know
Is
because
it
I've only dealt with
just,
Iowa
don't know.
Medicaid, so
I think we should investigate that.
Yeah.
Because it's a state specific problem, then we could go to fight this. If it's a national problem, not that we can't fight that, but that's a different fight. So maybe we could figure out if that's like a federal rule or just our state
I
rule.
suspect that's a state rule.
Me
Yeah.
too.
I do
That means we
suspect
could go
it's
to
a
fight
state
this
rule. I
one.
think we could fight this one.
Well, let's
and
find
even-
out. I think it'd be exciting to know because if it's just us, there's things, Josh, you'd be shocked to know that like right now the rule in Iowa is that they don't pay Medicaid into folks that are coming out of incarceration once they get to work release or even on parole, they say they're not eligible. That is not true anywhere else in the
Right.
country. It's an Iowa law or Iowa rule. So we've had real struggles with like getting people into a nursing facility where they could pull down Medicaid dollars or Medicare dollars or Social Security because our state defines them still as incarcerated. No other state does. So I've had to go to bat and be like, look, that's just a memo from 2016. We can change that. And so I'm wondering if this isn't one of those too, that they've decided as Iowans that this is what we're going to do. And I'm sure there's great reasons. But if we can show them sometimes good examples of evidence-based working in other states, the state has been willing to look at changes. And that's what I had to do on that Medicaid rule for incarceration. I had to bring them, that's not how it's done in this state or this state or whatever. And so we're starting to make some changes that way. So maybe this is one we can find an example of it working somewhere and say, hey, this is working in their state. Maybe we could do it too. Because I think you could be the trailblazer and kind of open the doors for others that are coming behind you that could share this experience. And I think it'd be great for all of us. And I think it'd be a big benefit.
And I expect you're right that it is just state. When someone finally told me, one of the 1,000 places that I applied for finally told me why no one would hire me, that it was a Medicaid thing. I set up my own business and applied to be a Medicaid provider myself because I could get an NPI and everything else I needed. And it's been in review since 2017. They said,
Oh my
we need to
gosh,
review
Josh.
this. And then I just never heard back again. So
That's
Oh
that
my
business
gosh,
lapsed.
that's insane.
that's
Yeah.
yep.
Never told me no, but never told me yes. Never told me anything. Just every time I
Let's
called,
leave
they
you
go,
in limbo.
yep,
That's
it's
the way to.
in review
Perfect
forever.
sense to me. Well,
That's
thank you
messed
so
up.
much for being here, Josh. You know, I
Thanks for
think
having me.
I've learned more from you over the time that I've known you, and it's just been an honor to work with you. So I appreciate you being here with us. The credibility you bring to the peer workforce, I think, is phenomenal. We need more folks like you who are willing to go out there and speak. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We may have to have you back. I think there's some other things we could talk about. So Renee, we might add that to the list down the road.
I don't disagree. Before we go, though, I want to talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. And I'm going to say that we need to drink more water. I don't know about y'all, but I'm really bad at that. And this time of year, it starts getting warmer outside, and I start thinking I get headaches by the end of the day. And I'm like, did I have any water today? And it could be as simple as that. But sometimes just need to drink a glass of water. And so I'm just going to make it super simple today, but to take care for ourselves, everyone, as the weather gets warmer. Let's do that. Well, today, friends, we had one of our friends, Josh Hubble, join us today. He was grateful for him joining us as a peer support, a specialist and expert in all things NAMI instruction world. He teaches all the classes, and he's been a real joy to get to know him over the last several years. Introduced him to Jason, who also really enjoys working with him. And we're just talking today about NAMI and the need for peer support and the need for their expertise, especially in that reentry community, when we're talking about probation, parole, and how that's just such a large gap in our community. And it has been, as Jason said in the data, for decades. So hopefully we can start making some inroads. We're going to start working on it here in Iowa. We'll all get together and come back and report back on the trouble we've caused. It'll be a lot of fun.
And Josh will get this I stepped in it sticker because he was on
He will.
this episode.
That's right. And it is a limited edition special sticker.
It
But before we go,
is.
don't forget everyone to listening out there to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube if you wish. We'd love to see you. And if you want to give us a positive review, we have other prizes we'll send your way. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.